AFAC from THD past. Los Angeles pulsed with its usual rhythm, cars weaving through traffic, horns blaring, and the aroma of roasted coffee beans lingering in the evening air. The city's towering skyline was lit in hues of amber and violet as the sun dipped behind the Hollywood hills. People moved with purpose, eyes locked on glowing phone screens, voices lost in the hum of the metropolis. Among them walked a man cloaked in quiet anonymity. Keanu Reeves blended seamlessly into the crowd, his long charcoal coat brushing against his legs with each unhurried step. A simple beanie hid his recognizable features, and sunglasses masked the soulful eyes the world had come to love. But this wasn't a disguise. This was who he truly was when the cameras weren't rolling. He had wrapped up a packed day, meetings with producers, a script read-through, and a campaign shoot. But instead of retreating to a luxurious hotel suite or heading to a swanky party, Keanu did what he often did on days like this. He wandered. No entourage, no agenda, just a man and the streets of the city he had a complicated relationship with. There was something sacred about these walks. They grounded him. Among the cracked sidewalks and faded storefronts of the older neighborhoods, he found a sense of realness, of humility. Keanu had always been drawn to the quiet corners of life, the overlooked details, the places where pain and beauty lived side by side. As he strolled past a worn-out bookstore on Santa Monica Boulevard, a place he remembered visiting as a teenager, the flicker of movement caught his eye. A woman sat curled against the brick wall, her figure shrunken under layers of ragged clothing. A cardboard sign rested in front of her. Anything else? God bless. Her hands, cracked and trembling, cradled a small cup with a few coins and a crumpled $5 bill. Her face was partially hidden beneath a weather-beaten scarf, but there was something hauntingly familiar about her presence. Keanu slowed. For a brief moment, he nearly kept walking. He had encountered many people experiencing homelessness throughout his years in LA, and he did what he could. Quiet donations, support to shelters, funding transitional housing programs. But tonight, something felt different. Something tugged at him. He turned his head slightly and truly looked at her. The woman was older, her hair streaked with gray, her cheeks sunken from malnutrition. Her body looked fragile, as if it could be carried away by the wind. But her eyes. Keanu's heart stopped. Those eyes. He froze mid-step. Time seemed to stretch as memories surged forward like floodwaters breaking through a dam. A small kitchen in Toronto. The scent of warm bread. Laughter. A lullaby sung softly in Portuguese. A comforting hand on his back during nights when the world felt too heavy for a child to bear. It couldn't be. Maria. He whispered, the name catching in his throat like a prayer. The woman flinched. Her head rose slowly. Her tired eyes locked onto his. And for a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Keanu. She rasped, her voice fragile, almost broken. A rush of emotion overtook him. Shock, disbelief, grief, and something else. A deep, aching sorrow. It was her. Maria, his childhood nanny. The woman who had been more than a caretaker. She had been his safe haven. After his father left and his mother juggled multiple jobs to keep them afloat, Maria had stepped in. She had cooked their meals, held Keanu when he cried, cheered him on during his school plays, and protected him fiercely during those turbulent early years. He hadn't seen her in decades. And now, here she was, alone, cold, forgotten. Maria, my God. Keanu sank to his knees in front of her, his voice breaking. Maria's eyes welled with tears. Is it really you? He reached for her hands. They were ice cold, shaking. Her skin was paper thin, but her grip still had a trace of that same strength he remembered. I can't believe this, he muttered. How? What happened? Maria's lips trembled. It's been a long story, my boy. Her voice cracked, and the tears spilled over. I never wanted you to see me like this. Keanu shook his head fiercely. No, Maria. I should have found you. I should have kept in touch." His throat tightened. "You were family to me. You are family." People passed by them, a few glancing curiously, but no one stopped. It was Los Angeles, after all. Even the extraordinary could vanish into the ordinary background noise. But for Keanu, the world had shrunk to just this one moment. "I'm taking you with me," he said firmly. "You're not staying here. Not for one more night." Maria tried to protest, but her voice faltered. "Keanu, I don't want to be a burden." "You could never be a burden," he interrupted, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "Never." He helped her to her feet carefully, holding her like she was the most precious person in the world, which, in that moment, she was. Her legs were unsteady, and she winced with each step. Keanu didn't hesitate. He scooped her up into his arms. "You always carried me when I scraped my knees," he whispered with a broken smile. "Now it's my turn." As he walked toward his car, Maria leaned against his chest, tears soaking into the fabric of his shirt. It wasn't just relief. It was years of pain finally allowed to surface. The ride to his home in the Hollywood Hills was silent, but it wasn't awkward. Maria stared out the window, watching the city lights blur by, her fingers still laced with his. Keanu never let go. His home was a modest one by celebrity standards. Elegant, serene, filled with art and books, not lavish decor. He guided her inside gently, helping her sit on the couch. "I'll get you some warm soup," he said, already moving toward the kitchen. "Same recipe?" Maria asked, her voice small. Keanu paused, a smile touching his lips. "Exactly how you used to make it." She laughed softly, then coughed. He returned with the soup in minutes, kneeling beside her as she ate. It wasn't long before she fell asleep on the couch, exhaustion overtaking her. Keanu sat nearby, watching her with a heavy heart. How had this happened? How had someone so full of kindness, someone who had given everything to others, ended up on the streets? The questions churned inside him. He picked up his phone and dialed. "Hey, Mike," he said when his assistant answered. "I need you to clear my schedule for the next few days. I've got something important to take care of." And just like that, the world's most private actor set aside everything else to focus on the one thing that mattered most, finding out what happened to Maria and how to help her rebuild her life. Because kindness isn't just what we give when it's convenient. It's what we give when it matters most. The years that were lost. The house was silent, except for the occasional crackle from the fireplace. Keanu sat in the armchair across from the couch where Maria lay sleeping, bundled in a thick fleece blanket. Her breathing had evened out, slow and deep, as if her body had finally found permission to rest after years of weariness. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. His mind replayed every moment from earlier that evening like a looping reel. Her face, the disbelief, the frailty, and the gut-punch realization that someone so instrumental to his childhood had slipped into the shadows of society without anyone noticing. His thoughts wandered back to those early years in Toronto. His father had left when Keanu was just a toddler, disappearing into the haze of his own troubled life. His mother, a costume designer, worked around the clock to support Keanu and his younger sister, Kim. There were nights she didn't make it home, and mornings when breakfast was nothing but a glass of juice and a rush out the door. Maria had stepped in like a guardian angel. She wasn't just a nanny. She was the warm light that kept the cold of abandonment at bay. She braided Kim's hair before school, taught Keanu how to tie his shoes, and told them bedtime stories with colorful voices and dramatic flair. She was part of the family in every way that counted. But somewhere along the way, life pulled them apart. Keanu became a teenager, then a young actor, chasing auditions and scraping by, and Maria moved back to New York to care for her ailing sister, or so he had heard in a brief letter she sent. And then, silence. The years swallowed her up. He had always meant to look her up, to reconnect. He never imagined finding her like this. The sun broke gently over the hills, spilling golden light across the living room floor. Keanu was still there, eyes tired but alert, when Maria stirred. She blinked slowly, disoriented, before sitting up halfway, her back aching. "Good morning," Keanu said softly, rising from the chair. Maria looked around, her eyes adjusting to the comfort around her. It felt surreal. "I thought it was a dream," she whispered. "I was hoping it wasn't," Keanu replied with a gentle smile, handing her a cup of warm tea. "You slept like a rock." She smiled weakly. First good sleep in a long time. He pulled a chair closer and sat across from her, the tea warming his hands. There was a pause between them, soft but full. "I have 1,000 questions," Keanu said, "but we'll take it slow. Only what you're ready to share." Maria stared into her cup. The tea steamed up into her face, and she closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. For a long moment, the silence hung again. Then she began. "I stayed in New York after I left you and your family," she said slowly. "My sister had cancer. She didn't have anyone else. I was all she had." Keanu nodded, remembering the brief mention of her sister in one of her last letters. "I took care of her until the end. 3 years. I worked nights, cleaned apartments during the day. After she passed, I thought maybe I'd go back to Toronto. But there wasn't much waiting for me there anymore. My family in Portugal, well, they were scattered. Some gone. Some didn't keep in touch." She sipped the tea, her hands still trembling slightly. "I came to Los Angeles in hopes of better work. Maybe a job as a caregiver again, something steady. But things were different. I was older. The city was harsher than I remembered. I bounced between cleaning jobs, home care. Never enough to keep up." Her voice thinned. "Then I got sick. Nothing fatal, just hospital visits, medications I couldn't afford. One missed rent payment turned into 2. Then an eviction. Just like that." Keanu's jaw tightened. Maria gave a sad little laugh. "You'd be surprised how quickly life slips through your fingers. You hold on tight. But sometimes it's not enough." He leaned forward, pain etched into every line of his face. "Why didn't you reach out? Why didn't you call me?" She looked down at her lap, her voice low. "I didn't want you to see me like that. I knew you had your own life, your own world. I saw you on magazine covers, in movies. You were doing so well. I didn't want to burden you or bring shame." Keanu shook his head, tears brimming in his eyes. "Maria, you could never be a burden. If anything, I owe so much of who I am to you. You were there when no one else was. You held me together when everything was falling apart." She smiled faintly, but tears spilled onto her cheeks. "I kept the letters you sent when you were first starting out," she said. "I used to show them to my friends. That's my boy. I'd say, that's my Keanu." He reached across the space between them and held her hands again. "You're not alone anymore. Not now. Not ever." Over the next few days, Keanu shifted everything to ensure Maria's comfort. A private doctor came to the house to assess her health. Nothing terminal, but years of living on the streets had taken a toll. Dehydration, muscle atrophy, the lingering respiratory infection. But with rest and proper care, she would recover. A small team of caregivers, trusted, discreet, were brought in to help during the nights. A nutritionist designed meals tailored to her needs. Keanu even had one of the guest rooms transformed with fresh bedding, soft lighting, and photographs from their past. Images he had dug up from old albums in storage. One photo in particular made Maria cry. Young Keanu and Kim, no older than 10 and 6, hugging Maria in a backyard garden, their faces beaming. "You kept this," she whispered. "Of course I did," he said. "That was one of the happiest days of my life." And just like that, something began to thaw in her. Decades of loneliness, of shame, of fear. It started to melt under the warmth of safety and remembrance. But there were still questions that gnawed at Keanu. How had someone like Maria, kind, hardworking, fiercely loyal, fallen through the cracks so completely? He began digging quietly, using private investigators to trace her records, old addresses, work history. What he discovered only deepened his resolve. A trail of missed chances, denied benefits, and bureaucratic indifference. A cruel system that was quick to forget people once they slipped below the radar. One document hit him hardest. A letter of recommendation Maria had written but never sent, addressed to a caregiving agency in Beverly Hills. The letter was never mailed because, as a note scribbled on the back said, couldn't afford postage this week. It broke him. He sat in his home office with the letter in hand and wept. A week passed, and Maria began to regain her strength. Her steps steadied, her eyes brightened, and she laughed more. A warm, familiar laugh that filled the house with a nostalgic joy. One afternoon, Keanu found her in the garden, humming to herself while pruning a few potted plants. She looked peaceful. "I was thinking," he said, "maybe we can get away for a while. Somewhere quiet, just the two of us. You used to love Lake Louise." Her eyes sparkled. "I haven't seen that place in over 30 years. "Well," Keanu grinned, "I have a plane. And I know a little cabin right on the water. Let's go." She hesitated, then nodded, her hand resting gently over his. "You always were the sweetest boy." That night, as he packed a small bag for their trip, Keanu thought deeply about what he wanted this next chapter to be. It wasn't enough to rescue Maria from the streets. He wanted to restore her dignity, her spirit, her joy. And beyond that, he wanted to shine a light on all the Marias out there, the forgotten caretakers, the unseen heroes, the people whose lives mattered long before the world stopped noticing. This wasn't just a reunion. It was the beginning of something bigger, something extraordinary. A cabin of memories. The morning they left Los Angeles, the sky was painted in soft blush and gold, an ethereal quiet before the city stirred to life. Keanu helped Maria into the black SUV waiting in the driveway, her coat buttoned up, a new silk scarf gently wrapped around her thinning hair. She looked smaller than he remembered, but also stronger, like something within her had been reignited. "Where are we going again?" she asked with a twinkle in her eye. "Lake Louise," he said with a smile, helping her into the passenger seat. "Canada. You're taking me back to Canada." Her voice trembled slightly, not with fear, but disbelief. "We both left a part of ourselves there," he replied. "Maybe it's time we go find it." Maria's fingers clutched the scarf as the car rolled away. Her eyes misted over as the city faded behind them. The jet ride was smooth, private, quiet. Maria marveled at the view from the window, her breath catching at the first sight of the snow-capped peaks. It had been so long since she'd seen real mountains. Keanu sat beside her, watching her more than the view. He was searching for traces of the woman who used to chase him through snowbanks in thick boots, who built snowmen with Kim in the backyard, while singing fado songs in Portuguese. Every few moments, Maria would squeeze his hand gently, silently reassuring him. "I'm okay. I'm still here." The cabin stood alone, nestled among tall pines, and looking out across the glassy blue surface of Lake Louise. It was early spring, and the last of the snow clung to the earth in patches, melting slowly under a reluctant sun. "This place," Maria whispered as Keanu helped her out of the car. "It's like a painting." He smiled. "It's ours for as long as we want it to be." The cabin, a modest but beautiful wooden home with wide windows and a fireplace made of river stones, welcomed them like an old friend. Inside, Maria found little touches Keanu had added in the days before they left. A photo of the three of them, Maria, Keanu, and Kim, on a shelf. A familiar crocheted throw blanket draped over the couch. A mug painted by a child's hand that read, "World's Best Nanny." Her eyes brimmed again. "You kept all of this." "I never forgot," he said softly. Days passed in gentle rhythm. The outside world, for once, felt distant, almost irrelevant. Keanu cooked simple meals, just like Maria used to. They took short walks through the woods behind the cabin when she was strong enough, and on quiet afternoons, They sat by the window drinking tea, watching the mist roll off the lake like a curtain rising on memory. Maria talked more each day, her voice stronger. "I used to dream of this," she said once, as the two of them watched a pair of birds circle above the treetops. "Just peace. No noise. No fear." "What stopped you from getting it?" Keanu asked gently. She was quiet for a moment. "I think I stopped myself. You spend enough time surviving, you forget what living feels like." He nodded, understanding more than he could say. He had lost friends, lovers, family. He knew the fragility of peace. He knew how easy it was to confuse endurance with healing. One morning, Maria woke earlier than usual. She stepped out onto the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, the cold air biting at her cheeks. Keanu joined her moments later, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. "The mountains haven't changed," she said, her voice tinged with wonder. "They're the same as they were 30 years ago." "That's why I love them," Keanu replied. "You can measure your life against them." Maria smiled faintly. "Do you ever wonder why you made it out, when others didn't?" Keanu paused, then nodded. "All the time. I used to think God gave you to me," she said. "After your father left, your mother was struggling so hard. But you were light, even as a boy. You always had this gentleness in you, like you were carrying something more than your own weight." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "You carried me more than you ever knew, Maria." They stood in silence for a while, sipping coffee, the mist curling around the porch like a soft veil. On the 5th day, Maria surprised him. "I want to go into town," she said. "I want to see people, smell bread baking, walk around." Keanu raised his eyebrows. "Are you sure? I've hidden long enough." So they bundled up and drove into the nearby village, a quaint place full of bakeries, bookstores, and small boutiques. Maria moved slowly, but with purpose. Keanu stayed close, offering his arm only when she needed it. At the bakery, she picked out warm croissants and chatted with the baker in broken French. At the bookstore, she picked up a children's poetry book and held it to her chest. "You used to love this one," she told him. "You made me read it every night for a week." He chuckled. Some things stick. The day was simple, but transformative. People passed by, some whispering when they recognized Keanu, but he gave no attention to fame. His entire focus was Maria. She laughed for the first time in weeks. A deep belly laugh that made people turn and smile. She was alive again. That evening, back at the cabin, Maria sat at the table scribbling something onto a notepad. "What are you writing?" Keanu asked, setting down a plate of freshly grilled vegetables. "My story," she said. "Or at least, the parts I remember." He sat down across from her. "You're writing a memoir?" "More like a letter to myself, or maybe to all the women like me." Keanu's eyes shone. "Would you ever want to share it?" Maria looked up. "Would anyone care to read it?" "I think," he said, "a lot of people would." Later that night, they sat by the fire again. Maria reached for Keanu's hand. "I never had children of my own," she said, "but I always believed God gave me you and Kim to fill that space." "You were a mother to us," he replied, "more than anyone else." She nodded. "That's the one thing I never regretted." Keanu looked into the flames, his voice steady but heavy. "Maria, I want to do more than just help you now. I want to help others like you. People who gave their lives in service of others and ended up forgotten. I've seen too much of it." She nodded slowly. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know yet. A foundation. A support network. Something real. Something lasting. We'll build it together, with your story." Maria looked down at her notepad, then back at him. "Then I better make it a good one." As the fire crackled on, the stars filled the sky outside the cabin, reflecting in the still waters of Lake Louise. It was a night neither of them would forget. A night when 2 lives, separated by decades and sorrow, found their way back to something whole. Not just survival, but renewal. The legacy of care. The world outside the cabin had begun to thaw. Spring crept through the trees in glimmers of green and the gentle rustle of wildlife returning. Maria had found her rhythm again, waking early, sipping coffee on the porch, jotting down memories in the notebook Keanu had bought for her in town. Her handwriting was shaky at first, but steadying day by day, just like her spirit. Inside the cabin, Keanu worked from a small desk near the window. A script sat untouched beside his laptop. Instead, his focus was on something far more important, an idea that had started as a whisper and was now demanding to be heard. The vision. It began as a conversation. Late-night chats by the fireplace, with Maria wrapped in her favorite blanket and Keanu cross-legged on the floor, typing notes into his phone. What if we created a place? He had asked one evening. Not just a shelter, a home. A real home for caregivers, nannies, nurses, aides, women like you who gave everything to others, but had no one when they needed help. Maria blinked at him, the idea like a flicker of light in her eyes. A sanctuary. Exactly, Keanu nodded. We'll call it the Maria House. She laughed softly. You're naming it after me. You saved me. It's only right. From that moment, the idea grew fast. It expanded from a home to a movement, a network of support systems, housing, therapy, skill retraining, legal aid, an entire infrastructure dedicated to lifting up the very people society often forgot once their usefulness ran out. He began making calls. Old friends, business partners, philanthropists, foundations he'd supported quietly for years. They listened, and more importantly, they believed. Back in the city, a month after arriving at the cabin, Keanu and Maria returned to Los Angeles. It was an emotional departure. Maria had grown to love the lake, the stillness, but she understood that something greater was calling them back. The jet touched down just after noon. As they exited the plane, a few paparazzi waited, lenses raised, but Keanu shielded Maria carefully. He gave no interviews, no statements. This was not for headlines. The first few weeks were quiet. Keanu rented a cozy guest house in the Hollywood Hills, giving Maria independence while still keeping her close. She insisted on cooking dinner once a week. To feel normal, she'd said, and Keanu obliged, gladly cleaning up afterward while she told stories from her youth in Lisbon. But behind the scenes, the Maria House was taking shape. The first steps. Keanu assembled a small team of trusted professionals, social workers, nonprofit directors, trauma counselors, and architects. He rented an old Spanish-style building near Echo Park, once a schoolhouse, now a crumbling shell with cracked windows and faded murals on the walls. Maria walked through the building the first time with tears in her eyes. It needs love, she whispered. It'll get it, Keanu promised. Plans were drawn. Designs were created. A new vision emerged. Private rooms filled with light, a communal kitchen that encouraged conversation, a library filled with donated books and computers. The courtyard would be transformed into a healing garden. And in the center, a plaque would read, "In honor of caregivers who gave everything. Welcome home." A voice for the forgotten. Maria's story became the heart of the movement. At first, she was hesitant. She didn't see herself as an activist or a speaker. But Keanu encouraged her gently. "Your voice has power," he told her. "It's time the world hears it." With his help, Maria penned an open letter that was published in the New York Times. "For years, I believe I had no place left in the world. I was wrong. I was never invisible. I just needed someone to look. Caregivers like me exist in the shadows. It's time we stepped into the light." The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in, hundreds, then thousands, from people all over the world. Former nannies, home nurses, elder care workers, single mothers, immigrant women, each with their own story of giving everything and ending up with nothing. Keanu read each letter. So did Maria. Some nights they cried together. And slowly, something miraculous happened. Other celebrities reached out, quietly, respectfully. They offered funding, buildings, land, volunteers. What began as one house was soon shaping into a national initiative. The grand opening. 6 months after that day on the sidewalk, the day Keanu found her hunched outside a bookstore in a forgotten part of LA. Maria stood at a podium under a white tent, surrounded by people who had once walked similar roads of loneliness and loss. She wore a soft blue dress. Her silver hair was pinned back. She looked strong, radiant, dignified. Keanu stood a few feet behind her, his eyes glistening. Years ago, Maria began, her voice firm. I believe I had served my purpose and faded into the margins. But I was wrong. My story wasn't over, and neither is yours. Applause rose like a wave. This house, the Maria house, is not mine alone. It belongs to all of us who gave quietly and loved fiercely. You are seen. You are remembered. You are home. As the crowd erupted into standing ovation, Keanu stepped forward and embraced her. I'm proud of you, he whispered. I'm proud of you, she whispered back. Private moments. That night, long after the cameras were gone and the tents were taken down, Maria sat with Keanu in the backyard of the guest house. They sipped chamomile tea under a canopy of stars. You know, Maria said with a soft smile, I used to pray that you'd find happiness, peace. I never imagined I'd be part of it again. You never stopped being part of it, Keanu replied. I just forgot how to find you. She reached over and took his hand. You reminded me that even when life breaks us, there's still beauty in what remains. Still hope, still love. He nodded, voice quiet. And second chances. The ripple effect. In the months that followed, the Maria house became more than just a shelter. It became a movement. Satellite homes opened in New York, Chicago, Atlanta. Each had its own name, but shared a plaque that paid tribute to caregivers. Media attention exploded, but Keanu refused to make it about him. It was about Maria, about dignity, about memory, about justice. One night, while speaking at a fundraiser, Keanu said, Fame gives you a platform, but kindness, that gives you purpose. And Maria, seated in the front row, wiped a tear as she watched the boy she once cradled in her arms become a man who changed the world. A quiet ending, a powerful beginning. 1 year after the day he found her, Maria moved into a small home of her own, not far from the Maria house. A quiet, sunlit space with a garden she tended every morning and wind chimes that danced in the breeze. She lived peacefully, giving interviews occasionally, speaking to young caregivers, and writing her memoir, which would later become a bestseller titled Invisible Hands. Keanu visited often. They shared meals, old movies, walks through the neighborhood. And every time he left, she would stand at her door and say, Thank you, my boy. To which he always replied, No, Maria. Thank you. The memoir that changed lives. The soft rustle of turning pages filled the quiet of Maria's sun-drenched living room. Spring had arrived in Los Angeles with a gentler spirit this year, as if even nature was honoring her story. A vase of wildflowers sat on the windowsill, fresh from the garden she tended each morning, and the scent of rosemary and lavender drifted through the air. Maria sat in her favorite chair, a shawl around her shoulders, her eyes scanning the final chapter of the book she never imagined she'd write. Invisible Hands, a caregiver's journey from silence to strength. It was more than a memoir. It was a mirror held up to the unseen women of the world. The nannies, the nurses, the live-in caretakers, the elder support workers, those who held families together, raised generations, and were too often discarded when their usefulness expired. She had poured her heart into it, piece by piece. The memories weren't always easy. There were nights she cried herself to sleep after writing a particularly painful chapter. But Keanu had been there every step of the way. reading drafts, encouraging her, reminding her that truth was healing, even when it hurt. The book launch. The launch was held at a small, intimate theater in Santa Monica, with walls lined with photos of caregivers from around the world. Some were elderly, some were young, some were no longer living, but all had stories that deserved to be told. Keanu arrived early, dressed in a simple black suit. He avoided the red carpet entirely, instead slipping in through a side entrance with Maria on his arm. Tonight wasn't about flash or headlines. It was about legacy. The room fell silent when Maria took the stage. She paused, her heart pounding. A soft spotlight bathed her in light. "I was never meant to be the center of attention," she began, her voice quiet but sure. "For most of my life, I was the one behind the scenes, the one who wiped tears, who sang lullabies, who waited in silence until someone needed something. I was the shadow in the background of other people's lives." She looked up, her voice thick with emotion. "But we are not shadows. We are the thread that binds families. We are the hands that hold broken hearts. And we deserve to be seen." The applause was thunderous. Some stood. Many wept. Keanu, seated in the front row, looked on with quiet pride. A viral awakening. Within a week, Invisible Hands became a bestseller. It was reviewed by the New Yorker, Time, and Oprah Daily. Celebrities posted photos of it on their nightstands. But what mattered most were the messages that flooded in. Emails, letters, social media posts, from readers all over the world. A single mother in Chicago wrote, "I've been a caregiver for my father for 6 years. No one ever said thank you until I read this book. I didn't know I needed to hear it." A hospice nurse in London. "For the first time, I feel like someone sees me." Even former employers, wealthy families who had hired nannies and elder aides, began asking themselves uncomfortable questions. Had they done enough? Had they paid fairly? Had they thanked the women who helped raise their children? Bookstores hosted panels. Universities invited Maria to speak via live stream. Hospitals ordered copies in bulk for their palliative care teams. It wasn't just a memoir. It was a movement. Maria's message. Maria never intended to become a symbol, but the world had decided otherwise. Her days became a whirlwind of interviews, online discussions, and meetings with policymakers who wanted her insight on improving caregiver protections and retirement benefits. She was flown to Washington, D.C., where she spoke before a congressional subcommittee on elder care reform. Keanu traveled with her. He stood back, quietly, allowing Maria to lead. This was her story now. He was just the grateful witness. In one interview, when a journalist asked her what it was like to become an international inspiration at 73, Maria smiled. "It's never too late to matter," she said. "You don't need a stage or a spotlight. Sometimes you just need someone to believe you're worth saving." Back to the beginning. One sunny afternoon, Maria asked Keanu to take her back to the place where he had found her. Outside the bookstore on Santa Monica Boulevard. They went quietly. No press. No entourage. She stood there, looking at the spot where she had once sat, cold and forgotten, with nothing but a cardboard sign and a paper cup. "I thought I would die here," she said softly. Keanu stepped beside her. "You lived instead." She nodded. "Because you looked back." They didn't speak for a while after that. They just stood in the breeze, letting the past rise and settle. Then Maria reached into her purse and pulled out a new cardboard sign. But this one didn't say anything else. Instead, it read, "Thank you. I'm home now." Keanu smiled, tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. "Can I take a photo?" Maria nodded. He snapped a picture and later posted it to his personal social media with a simple caption. "I found my family again." She found her voice. Never forget to look back. The post went viral within hours. Ripple effects. Inspired by Maria's story, a dozen major caregiving agencies announced new wage protections and retirement funds. 3 major cities pledged to build transitional housing for displaced caregivers. A national helpline for retired or at-risk nannies was launched, named in Maria's honor. A documentary followed, narrated by Keanu, and directed by an Academy Award-winning filmmaker. It debuted at Sundance and later won accolades for its raw, human portrayal of forgotten labor. Maria's photo, holding her new sign, became a symbol worldwide. In posters, in museum exhibitions, in humanitarian conferences, it reminded people of the quiet heroes in their own lives. An unexpected visit. One day, an elderly woman knocked at Maria's door. She wore a crisp white blouse and carried a faded leather handbag. "I'm sorry to drop in," she said gently. "My name is Evelyn. I used to be a nanny. I read your book. I had nowhere else to go." Maria welcomed her in without hesitation. She made tea. They sat and talked for hours. Evelyn stayed the night, then the week, then forever. She became the second resident in what would become Maria's next project, the Caregivers Circle, a co-housing community for retired caregivers who wanted to live with dignity, companionship, and peace. "It's not about charity," Maria said. "It's about connection." A quiet legacy. Years passed. Maria's hair turned silver white. She walked slower. She needed help with stairs, but her mind remained sharp, her voice steady, her smile as warm as ever. Keanu visited often, bringing books, fresh fruit, and flowers from her old garden. Sometimes they'd sit on the porch and just listen to the wind chimes together. "Are you proud of me?" she asked one day, her voice soft. He looked at her, eyes glimmering. "I'm proud to know you." She smiled. "Then I have everything." And one last gift. Before she passed, Maria left behind a letter for Keanu. It was handwritten on soft linen paper, folded neatly in the pages of the first edition of Invisible Hands. "My sweet boy, you gave me the gift of being remembered. But more than that, you gave me my life back. There are no words big enough to hold my gratitude, so I'll leave you with this. Keep looking. There are more of me out there, and they need someone like you to turn around. I'll be waiting in every garden breeze, in every child's laugh, in every quiet room where kindness is needed. I love you. Always. Maria." Keanu kept that letter with him always, tucked inside his jacket, worn and folded from time, but never far from his heart. And whenever he walked the streets of Los Angeles, those same streets filled with invisible hands, he looked, he saw, and he never forgot to turn back. The streets remember. The world had changed since the day Keanu Reeves found Maria on that cold Los Angeles sidewalk. Or maybe, more truthfully, he had changed, and in doing so, the world around him had followed suit. The city still bustled with its usual rhythm. Endless traffic, the muted wail of sirens in the distance, the rustle of palm trees in the wind, and the neon glow of promises made and broken. But to Keanu, the streets whispered differently now. He walked them more deliberately, more often, and he saw what most people didn't, what he once hadn't. He saw the forgotten. The ones sitting quietly outside coffee shops, the elderly woman with calloused hands selling hand-knitted scarves on the corner, the man sleeping under a freeway overpass with a framed photo of a young child clutched to his chest, the middle-aged woman with sunburned skin and cracked glasses who smiled at every stranger and asked for nothing. He didn't walk by anymore, because Maria had taught him better. A walk with purpose. Keanu was known in Hollywood for his humility, for his stillness in a world of noise. But in the months following Maria's passing, that stillness deepened into something richer, a quiet activism rooted in listening, learning, and loving without expectation. One day, dressed simply in jeans, a hoodie, and a beanie, Keanu took a different route home. Instead of Sunset Boulevard, he cut through Skid Row. He'd been there before, but this time, he didn't just drive through it. He walked. The smell of human struggle was thick in the air. Sweat, smoke, urine, desperation. Tents lined the sidewalks like a makeshift village. flapping gently in the breeze. People huddled in sleeping bags. Some laughed in circles. Others stared at the sky, their eyes vacant. Keanu stopped at a small tent made of patched-together tarps. A man with graying dreadlocks sat outside, whittling a piece of wood into a tiny figure. Keanu crouched beside him. "That's beautiful," he said. The man looked up, surprised. You're Keanu Reeves." Keanu smiled. "Just Keanu." The man chuckled. "I'm Elijah." They talked for 20 minutes, about wood carving, about the stars, about loss. Elijah used to be a schoolteacher, lost his wife to cancer. Then his home. Then his job. One misfortune at a time, until the world forgot him. Keanu didn't preach. He didn't offer a solution. He just listened. Before he left, he said, "There's a place you should know about. The Maria House. They might have room. If you're ready, I can take you." Elijah hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "I think I'm ready." The Maria House, grown and thriving. What began as one building had grown into 6, each one named after a different caregiver, each one a sanctuary. The flagship Maria House was now home to over 50 women and men, each with a room of their own, access to counselors, doctors, education programs, and most importantly, community. But it wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a place to reclaim identity. Former nurses who had once slept in stairwells were now teaching CPR classes. Retired nannies taught parenting workshops to young mothers. Groundskeepers tended a garden full of vegetables and wildflowers that fed the kitchens of all 6 houses. Maria's legacy was alive. And Keanu made it a point to visit often, without cameras, without fanfare. He showed up to gardening days, birthday parties, and healing circles. He knew the residents by name. He brought books, tea, instruments. Sometimes he just brought his presence. The wall of hands. At the center of the main Maria House stood a tall white wall lined with hundreds of handprints, painted in every color: red, blue, green, gold. Each handprint belonged to someone who had once been invisible. Above the wall, a plaque read, "We were never lost. We were waiting to be seen." Keanu added Maria's handprint himself, a soft lavender. He cried as he pressed her glove into wet paint, then stepped back and looked at it for a long time. He didn't cry publicly often, but that day he did. The echo of memory. It wasn't just the houses, it was the ripple effect. Booksellers began adding special shelves labeled Caregivers' Stories. Schools began teaching basic empathy training based on Maria's memoir. Nursing programs required first-year students to read Invisible Hands as part of their curriculum. A famous actress-turned-philanthropist funded a scholarship in Maria's name for first-generation immigrant women training to become licensed care aides. Maria's name had become shorthand for dignity. Her story had become a map for millions. But for Keanu, it was something far more intimate. It was a voice that still whispered in the quiet. An unplanned encounter. Late one evening, while walking back from a quiet dinner in the Arts District, Keanu noticed a young woman sitting alone on a bench outside a closed laundromat. She looked no older than 25. Her hoodie was too thin for the cool air. Her backpack sat at her feet. Keanu hesitated, then walked over. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up, wary, then nodded. He sat beside her in silence for a moment. Then softly, "You okay?" She shrugged. "Been better." He waited. "I aged out of the foster system last year," she said eventually. "Had a housing voucher, but it expired. Been couch surfing. Nowhere else to go." "What's your name?" he asked. "Amira." He smiled gently. "Nice to meet you, Amira. I'm Keanu." She blinked. "The Keanu." He chuckled. "Just Keanu." He reached into his pocket and handed her a small card. "The Maria House. There's a youth branch too. I can call them for you." Amira stared at the card. Tears welled in her eyes. No one's ever looked at me like I was worth saving." Keanu shook his head softly. "You were never lost, just waiting to be seen." The streets remember. With every new resident who came through the doors of the Maria house, another invisible soul became visible. With every handshake, hug, or listening ear, the streets that once bore witness to suffering began to hum with quiet hope. Artists began painting murals of caregivers across the city, vivid portraits of strong women holding children, of elderly men teaching young ones how to plant seeds, of hands cradling hearts. One of the largest murals, on a wall near Sunset and Vine, depicted Maria herself. Her face was serene, smiling, wise, and at the base of the mural, in bold lettering, "She saved a child. He saved the world she came from." Keanu's mission. Keanu no longer called it charity. He called it justice. In interviews, he rarely spoke about the newest films or upcoming premieres unless asked. Instead, he talked about caregivers, about dignity, about building a world where no one who gave their life in service should have to live their final years in shame or silence. He quietly turned down millions in endorsement deals, redirecting them to fund transitional housing, legal aid clinics, and the expansion of Maria houses to rural areas. The press still called it philanthropy, but Keanu called it a promise kept, a message in the wind. On what would have been Maria's 76th birthday, Keanu returned to Lake Louise, the same cabin where her story began to bloom again. He walked through the woods, alone, the same path they had taken together once. He reached the edge of the lake, where the water shimmered like glass. He carried with him a single page, a handwritten excerpt from invisible hands that he'd never shared publicly. He folded it neatly, placed it inside a small biodegradable lantern, and set it on the water. As it floated away, he whispered, "Thank you for seeing me when I didn't know how to see myself." The wind picked up. The trees swayed, and Keanu felt her there still. A promise that lives forever. Time passes differently when it's measured in impact instead of hours, in love instead of lines, in legacy instead of loss. It had been 2 years since Maria passed, but in Keanu Reeves' life, and in the lives of those who had heard her story, Maria wasn't gone. She was everywhere. In the warm welcome of shelter doors opening to a former caregiver, in the hands of a grandmother teaching a teenage girl how to sew, in the voice of a man who, once broken, now read bedtime stories to children in the community garden of the Maria house. Keanu had promised her something that night by the fire, something that went beyond donations, beyond headlines. He had promised to remember, to build, to continue, and he had kept that promise every single day. The global tapestry. By now, there were over 50 Maria houses in 14 countries. Each one carried a plaque inscribed with a simple truth: everyone who gives love deserves a place to receive it. The movement had gone global. In Sao Paulo, a former street nanny named Lucia now led caregiver advocacy workshops. In Manila, a single mother of 5 who once lived in a shack now managed the newest Maria House branch, overseeing dozens of residents who, like her, had once lived in silence. And in Nairobi, a mural of Maria smiled over a shelter built from recycled materials, its courtyard echoing with children's laughter and the hopeful songs of elders teaching Swahili lullabies. The stories weren't just touching. They were transforming. The quiet anniversary. On the 2nd anniversary of Maria's passing, Keanu spent the morning in reflection. No press, no speeches, just him and a worn journal, the one Maria had written in during their time in Lake Louise. Inside were pages of her thoughts, unfinished poems, scribbled prayers, and short notes she never got to say aloud. One note in particular stood out: "To be remembered is the highest kind of love." That day, Keanu visited the original Maria house, the old Spanish-style building near Echo Park, now beautifully restored and expanded. The residents greeted him with hugs, laughter, and tea, like they always did. A few shared updates. A grandmother reunited with her daughter. a retired hospice nurse who'd just gotten her first apartment in 15 years. After lunch, Keanu stepped outside to the garden, where Maria's favorite bench stood under a flowering jacaranda tree. He sat down and looked up at the sky. "I hope you see all this," he whispered. "It's because of you." The wind responded with a warm rustle of petals falling to the ground. A call from the past. That evening, Keanu received a message. A woman named Sophia Mendes, who now worked as a case manager at the Toronto Maria House, had uncovered something unexpected. A box of old letters that had been left at a retired postal sorting facility years ago, misfiled and forgotten. Inside were postcards, drawings, and letters written to Maria. Many from children. One in particular was from Kim Reeves, Keanu's sister, dated 1994. Keanu sat alone in his study, reading the note. "Dear Maria, I hope you're doing okay in New York. I miss you so much. No one sings lullabies like you. I remember how you used to braid my hair and tell me stories about the stars. I told Keanu to write to you too, but he's so busy now. Still, I hope he does. I hope you're warm. I hope someone is taking care of you the way you took care of us. I love you. Kim." Tears rolled freely down Keanu's face. She had always been there, for both of them. Even when they didn't know where she was, they had felt her presence, longed for it. And now, her memory was answering other children's prayers. Beyond a movement, a way of life, Keanu knew the Maria House couldn't end with him. He began training a leadership team, a collective of caregivers turned leaders, activists, and survivors who had lived the journey from invisibility to empowerment. One of them, Amira, the young woman he had found outside the laundromat, now led youth outreach across the entire West Coast. She'd gone back to school, earned her degree, and co-authored a follow-up book called Seen. She often quoted Maria when she spoke at events. "You were never lost, just waiting to be seen." Another, Elijah, the former woodcarver from Skid Row, taught workshops in woodworking therapy and built handmade furniture for each new Maria House branch. Their work wasn't charity, it was living tribute. Keanu once said in an interview, "When the world asks what I've done with my life, I hope the answer isn't just movies. I hope it's Maria." An unexpected honor. A letter came from the United Nations. They were establishing an international day for caregivers, and they wanted Keanu and the Maria House Initiative to open the ceremony in Geneva. Keanu hesitated. He didn't seek the spotlight, but Maria had taught him that sometimes stepping forward gave permission for others to be seen. He agreed, but under one condition. "You honor them, not me." On a cold, clear day, he stood at the podium in Geneva, thousands in the audience, millions watching worldwide. He held Maria's journal in his hands, and he read from it. "Caregiving is an invisible act. We feed people before ourselves. We stay awake so others can sleep. We remember birthdays no one remembers. We cry in bathrooms, then come back smiling. But what we do is not small. It's everything. And we are not ghosts." He looked up, emotion thick in his throat. "You are not ghosts. You are home. And the world sees you now." The standing ovation lasted almost 5 minutes. Legacy in stone. Back in Los Angeles, a public statue was unveiled near Maria's mural. It was not a likeness of her, but of her hands, open, strong, reaching forward. Children placed flowers there. Caregivers left notes. Some just touched it and cried. Keanu visited often. He never took photos. He just stood quietly, hands in his pockets, remembering a time when he was just a lonely boy. And a woman named Maria gave him love with no strings attached. Final days of the story. Years passed. Keanu aged gracefully, his hair graying at the temples, his walk slower, but his spirit still filled with gentle purpose. One autumn afternoon, while walking through a Maria House garden, a young girl approached him. She looked no older than 6, with wide, curious eyes. "Are you the man from the stories?" she asked. Keanu knelt beside her. What stories? She pointed at the statue. The ones about Maria. He smiled. I knew her. Did she save you too? Keanu's eyes softened. Yes, he said. She saved a lot of us. The little girl took his hand. Will you tell me a story about her? He nodded, and as they sat under the tree, with sunlight dancing through the leaves, Keanu began. Once, there was a woman whose kindness was so strong, even the world couldn't forget it. The bench beneath the stars. There is a bench overlooking Lake Louise now, carved from cedar and marked with a small plaque. It simply reads, For Maria, you were never invisible to the ones who truly saw. Visitors sit there often. Some cry, some reflect, some leave behind folded notes or wildflowers. And if you listen closely, when the wind stirs through the trees just right, it almost sounds like a lullaby.